aware, we're going to thank you. We are recording this episode. So for folks who don't want to be on camera or who aren't comfortable with their name being on camera, you can feel free to adjust that stuff now. You're more than welcome to be on camera and be joining us. We would love to see you and see your reactions. And yeah, I think first let's have a quick introduction. If folks want to introduce themselves in the chat, just who you are, where you're coming from. I'm actually calling in from Manoa right now. I'm on the UH campus, and I'm going to basically just popcorn it around to get our speakers all introduced, and then in the next couple of minutes we're going to get started with the speakers. So again, my name is Rebecca from Laing and JVP Hawai'i. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm calling in from Manoa. And we are asking folks to also maybe share some piece of news that you know about what's happening in Gaza right now. And so something that I've been hearing about is the most recent massacre in Khan Yunis, which is over 300 people. I think almost even 400 people have been confirmed dead and also injured, massive injuries in the past couple of days. So I want to, just remind us and center us again that we're here to talk about Palestine and the Philippines and what's happening in Gaza right now. Unfortunately, we're having another very intense round of violence from the Israeli military. So I'm going to popcorn it to Ken from Anakbayan. Go ahead, Ken.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ken. I'm calling here from Makiki in Hawaii, and I'm also with Anakbayan. I guess I've been, aside from the most recent massacre, I've been seeing a lot of just tweets about people being hungry and just the lack of food, the food insecurity and the medical insecurity. And I don't know, it just makes me so sad to see all these pictures of people trying to ration their food and trying to get resources to feed their families and even to feed their pets, So just very dire, very bleak, but it's also in some ways seeing a lot of, I don't know, a lot of them still post pictures of them smiling and trying to find some semblance of hope amidst their situation, and that kind of gives me some fuel to continue standing for them as well. But I want to pass it on to Misty.
Hi everyone. Yeah, sorry, I'm turn my video. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Misty, and I'm also a member of Anakbayan Hawaii. We are a comprehensive mass youth organization with our parent we are a chapter of Anakbayan USA, which is also a chapter of Anakbayan Philippines. So we're connected from Hawaii to the Philippines. And so we are an organization that fights for national democracy in the Philippines, as well as the liberation of all oppressed nations and peoples across the world. And so, as folks here today have already mentioned, we're here standing in solidarity with the people of Palestine and, connecting the different struggles between the Philippines and Palestine, as, U.S. imperialism has its hands in both areas and in many areas across the world. And so, one thing that I've also been hearing about what is happening in Gaza is also the massacre that has been happening forget my pronunciation, let me see. Sorry, I'm really bad with pronunciation, but Al Mawasi, where at least 90 people have also been confirmed dead, unfortunately, and the constant attacks on people and their justification being that they are targeting Hamas, and they're using this guise of targeting Hamas as a way to kill civilians, kill children, kill the Palestinian people. And so, it's just an ongoing fight for them as well. And not fight for them, but fight with them against US imperialism and the Zionist entity. So yes, with that, I will pass it to Judith.
Hi everyone. I'm from the Philippines. I'm calling from the Philippines right now. I am part of SAKA. In Filipino, it's Sama-samang Artista para sa Kilusang Agraryo, or Alliance of Artists for Genuine Agrarian Reform and Rural Development. So I feel like I also want to I also want to I guess share the sentiments of the previous people who gave Gaza updates with just before me. And I think I also want to mention that in the recent solidarity of the Filipino movements here in the Philippines for Palestine, there are a lot of demonstrations wherein they've been a lot more violent towards people who demonstrate. And it's been seen around the world. Recently, we have, and part of the artist alliances who are also advocating for food security are the vegan networks, and one of them is Edison U, who are from the recent demonstration in front of Israel embassy was just detained, and then with no violently detained, and then he's released. But then this is a lot of cases that are always present when it comes to challenging or put more on showing demonstration of Filipino solidarity for the Palestinian people. So I guess that's what I want to mention, that I hope we continue to show support and solidarity wherever we are in the world. Oh, is there anyone else that I can mention?
Let's go to Clarissa.
Oh, yes, Clarissa, thank you.
Hello, is mine. Okay, I don't know if my camera is working. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
We can hear you. You're good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Clarissa from Hawaii Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. I'm coming from Wailupe. My most I guess news I continue to hear is the lack of food, again, how everyone was mentioning in Gaza. And when recently attending the Cancer Impact Summit, when we had the breakout rooms, they mentioned how starvation is used as a tool to commit genocide. So that was just something that really has been sticking with me. Yeah.
Thanks, Clarissa. I just also wanted to mention, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier, that a lot of us are calling in from Hawaii, from the occupied sovereign nation of Hawaii, and that I think that will come up a little bit later in our conversation as well, just in terms of self-determination and autonomy for Indigenous peoples. It's important that we also recognize where we're calling in from. So thanks to everyone for sharing where you are. We have some folks here who are in Tongvalan in California, some folks from Aotearoa, and I think there was someone else, I can't remember. I think it's also mostly also Hawaii folks. So yeah, just really grateful for everyone for coming in and sharing the place name from where you're calling in from. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start with Judith, who's in Manila right now, and share a little bit more about what SAKA is working on, and yeah, give us a situationer on the Filipino peasant situation and community there. So go ahead, Judith. And Judith has some slides for us too, so let us know if you have any issues.
All right, thank you. I'll be sharing my screen. Good. I was so compelled to say good morning, everyone, but I think I'm the only one who's based in the Philippines. I'd love to know from anyone who's actually listening from the Philippines. So this is a slide that we give out to people who wants to learn about SAKA and the peasant situation in the Philippines. I will make this quick and of course, explain as much as I can. But after this, I'm very welcome to answer questions. And if there are any info that I can also provide for you, after this call or after this conference, I'd be happy to share. So I want to start this by this statement wherein I hope you can see my screen, by the way. The Philippine is an agricultural industry. The Philippine agricultural industry currently is very import dependent and export oriented. So just going in quickly that the new Department of Agricultural Secretary recently appointed is actually a fishing magnate from a corporation called Frebel Fishing Corporation. And this trickles down to all the policies, incoming policies, and all the policies previously that is reflected by the people who sits in these positions. So this is also a fact that as of March 2024, we are the #1 rice importer. And the highest rice inflation rate is recorded last February with 27%. So from the previous El Nino, so right now it's starting to rain a little bit, but then we're still recovering from the damages from El Nino, which is 1.23 billion. And I will go deeper into what the agricultural DA or Department of Agriculture is actually doing with that. But in regards to this, only 2 million hectares of land are irrigated. So just to put into perspective, that Philippines is a very rich country when it comes to natural resources. But let's look at the population. We are 109.6 million. But the agricultural land area is 124,000 square kilometer, and our coastline is 36,289. Sorry about the numbers. You don't have to take note of that, but in just the facts, that we are the largest coastline, 5th largest coastline in the world, most mineralized country in the world, 2nd largest producer of geothermal, and we sit at the Coral Triangle, or the center of the biodiversity, with 65 endemic fish species. And in contrast to that, we are the 28th poorest country, 4th hungriest country in ASEAN. 1 out of 7 Filipinos are without adequate supply of food, and 41.4 billion net worth of 25 richest Filipinos is equal to the combined income of 74 million poorest Filipinos. So that is something that we always put in perspective, that we have a lot of resources, but the resources are not, some food insecurity is very prevalent, and these natural resources are not produced for the Filipinos. So I know you have seen this diagram before, but this is just putting more perspective into what is the majority of the population, and they are farmers and labor workers. So 75% are farmers. So, and that defines also to the point that Philippines is an agricultural country. So from that summary of facts, I will walk you through the situation of the farmers in the Philippines and the conditions and the struggles that they are experiencing. So I hope I'm not talking too fast, but again, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat. So first and foremost is landlessness. And when we say landlessness, it means that they don't have the ownership to the land that they till. We often hear it that farmers are the backbones of the society and the economy. And the fact that they're not able to own the land that they till have a lot of factors that come into how food is distributed to every people's table in the Philippines. So when we say no legal ownership, farmers are made to be less educated when it comes to ownership of their land, and they are all aging. So so it is a fact that education to ownership of their land is taken away from them through a lot of means. One of it is, of course, fake reforms or fake titleship or ownership to their land. And a lot of them are displaced. So when we say that 75% of the Filipinos are farmers, not all of them are working on the farm anymore. And a lot of them are displaced out of their places or out of their lands, which will be also talked about in the next slides. And when we say this is due to the monopoly of the few, we talk about land grabbing, export monocrop plantations, the Cavendish bananas by Dole, and the pineapples, large land holdings, that really big hectares of land that are exhausted for logging and mining, and land use conversion, which is a very popular project by the government, wherein they use land for public use, but really benefits the corporations or the private entities behind it. So the reason, or some of it will be expressways that are dedicated for easier access to condominiums, housings, or that are also behind it would be the companies or corporations who are also distributors of cars and owners of fuel companies. So, and I'm maybe you've heard of things like build, wherein they want to build more and more public in the guise of public use, but then really it's a scheme to convert land areas into, or agricultural land areas into, things like this that do not really serve the interest of the Filipino people. So that is one. For 2 and 3, I'm going to wrap them together. So lack of capital for farming and high costs of agricultural production. And number 3 is another lack of access to materials and technologies and for production. So here in the Philippines, farming is backward, small scale, and fragmented. So when we say backward, all of the farm work, most of the farm work is still done manually with animal labor. So yes, it is a very picturesque thing to see farmers farming with kalabaw. Sorry, I forgot the English term for kalabaw. I can't. So and it's still done today. A lot of them are manually working on the farm with their bare foot, and under the heat of the sun, without tractors, without machineries. So they do everything manually, and that is a backward way of farming for most, even though it's been. And you would see paint. I always like to mention that there are a lot of paintings from decades ago that still is very accurately present in the current farming situation. So that's how backward farming right now is. Only, like I mentioned earlier, only 2 million hectares are irrigated. Water is hard to get by for farming, and this also produces low productivity for farming, and there is very weak linkage between local agriculture and industry. So a lot of things like this are was present during the lockdown, wherein a lot of food from different places in the Philippines are being thrown away because clearly the Philippine government do not have a very strong linkage to getting goods from directly from farmers, and we import a lot currently. So for 4 and 5, I'm also going to be bundling them together. So low prices of agricultural products and low wages for agricultural and farm workers. So this is clearly state neglect for the agricultural industry because they provide very, very small budget for agriculture. And this might be connected to human rights. And the bigger budget that they allocate with is for NTF-LCAF, or basically I forgot the meaning of NTF-LCAF, but they basically use it to legalize how they wage red tagging and anti-terrorism campaigns that targets the people in the countryside. So next is worsening effects of neoliberal policies in the agricultural sector. This has a lot to do with...
Just 2 minutes, Judith. Sorry, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Yes, no worries. So this has a lot to do with the people who are making the laws and the policies who are sitting in the government right now are the people who are also landlords who are also creating policies that will serve their interests. So a lot of it we usually post it on SAKA on these types of, whenever these news are also present. So rice liberalization law that focuses that shows loss of rice farmers due to depressed palay prices, and a lot of imported pork in 2021, which also goes back to the import dependent, export oriented current situation. So I mentioned this earlier. Sorry about the extension. And I think I want to just go quickly on how this goes back to the having militarization in the countryside and rampant human rights violations to farmers, linking it to what was mentioned earlier, that starvation is a tool that they use, or the state use, for occupation. This is also related to that, and to what's happening also in Palestine. So, and this is a stat from Duterte's regime that 348 farmers are massacred and killed due to land dispute. So for now, right now with Marcos, there is an updated slide for this. I just wasn't able to show, but Marcos, together with the U.S. practices of bringing their armed forces practices here in the Philippines, wherein they will be doing a lot of bombings and demonstrations in the countryside that affects the farmers who are this one, sorry. So aerial bombings, forced evacuations, and indiscriminate firing. So I guess to close this, I really want to put more perspective on how farmers are continuing to fight for the rights to land and livelihood. And together with advocates like SAKA, we want to define that having a genuine agrarian reform creates social justice, rural livelihoods and jobs, food self-sufficiency, of course, and people-centered national development, just peace, and environment protection. So by giving back the land to the farmers who know how to till, how to take care of them, and how to produce food that would feed the Philippines, that is why we always call for standing with farmers and to provide genuine agrarian reform for all farmers, in solidarity, of course, with the Palestine people.
Thank you, Judith. We appreciate that report. I know some folks here might not be that familiar with the situation of Philippine farmers and some of the interactions that they also have to face with the military. I was just in Mindanao last year on some of the independent banana plantations, and they're consistently struggling to maintain even just their ownership of the land that they did get back from the like larger corporations. So it's a constant struggle there. So thank you for sharing that. And I think at the end we can draw back some more connections to Palestine and what's happening now with their agricultural issues as well. So I'm gonna pass it on to Clarissa, who's gonna be speaking from HiCHRP, who's gonna be also giving us some updates on human rights issues in the Philippines. Go ahead, Clarissa, whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you, Judith, for talking about the semi-feudal state of the Philippines. I was also going to mention that for the Philippines situationer. So I'll just move on to so basically the Philippines is a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country, as Judith mentioned. So I'll just talk about the semi-colonial part. A semi-colonial country. A semi-colony is a country recognized as an independent nation. However, in the case of the Philippines, it is controlled by a country actively practicing direct acquisition through political and economic control. In the case of the Philippines, through economic control of Philippine territories, resources, as Judith mentioned, through the resources and its people. The semi-colony of the Philippines is observed by the people through the Visiting Forces Agreement, and the Enhanced Defense Corporation Agreement. Also, I'll be mentioning the Philippines Mining Act of 1995 and how that actually allows other corporations, foreign corporations and countries to come into the Philippines and basically plunder Philippine natural resources. Since Philippine independence, the Philippines has had 125 years of United States influence from the Visiting Forces Agreement. Currently, with the Rim of the Pacific exercises, or as we know it as RIMPAC, while no Philippine ships are to participate in the exercises for this year, Philippine observers are in attendance. So while there are no Philippine ships are attendant, or the Philippine attendance is still important to note, as the Philippines, with the Visiting Forces Agreement, the Philippine and U.S. Union is further affirmed, allowing for the maintenance, expansion, and rotation of American forces in the country. This agreement further bolsters America as a stronghold, with the exception of the military bases not being permanent in the Philippines. However, through these practices, women and children are at risk and face the brunt of the militarism, as we've seen in Olongapo, where Jennifer Laude was murdered by Joseph Scott Pemberton and was given absolute pardon by former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte in September 2020. Through these agreements, the Philippines primarily functions to support U.S. foreign interests and global monopoly. With the Mining Act of 1995, there are loopholes for foreign corporations to mine for specific minerals like zinc, copper, gold in large amounts, allowing for the plundering again of resources, which in itself is a form of colonial domination, with US-backed counterinsurgency tactics used in the Philippines to achieve economic and military prowess. There is no regard for international humanitarian law. Since 1990, the forest covering the Philippines has decreased from 20 million to approximately 6 million hectares, causing significant ecological damage. Through the outside corporations and countries taking opportunities in the Philippines as a semi-colony, there is no incentive for the government of the Philippines to advance from semi-feudalism, as seen by the steep class differences from the wealthy landowner to the urban poor and the landless peasants throughout the country. Thus, the wage of the People's War towards self-determination has been a long and ongoing conflict with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, the NDFP. The NDFP is a revolutionary movement for genuine democracy and self-determination for the Filipino people. Under international humanitarian law, the Filipino people have the right to resist the oppression of the Philippine government by the use of armed struggle. A 1982 resolution by the UN General Assembly reaffirmed the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means. After September 11, 2001, U.S. President George W. Bush called the Philippines the second front in the war on terror. The Philippine government used this to wage war against not only the Moro National Liberation Front, the MLNF, which has ceased fire since I think 2014 in the southern Philippines, but any and all individuals and organizations who oppose the Philippine policy. So that includes farmers, that includes peasants, that includes any union workers, thus being labeled terrorists by the Philippines and the U.S. government, using the tactics of political tagging, commonly known as red tagging, targeting activists, organizers, people's lawyers, consultants, peace advocates, and humanitarian aid workers, as well as journalists. Regime or government terror is conducts by organs of the state against its own population. It is characterized by kidnapping, assassination of political opponents of the government by the police, Secret Service, Army, or security forces. This is included but not limited to imprisonment without trial, persecution, and torture, massacres or racial and religious minorities or certain social classes. The NDFP, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, through the armed sector of the New People's Army, exercises the people's inherent right to self-determination in the Philippines. As the government is fully supported and backed by the U.S., allowing the Philippine government to engage in violent oppression through counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist campaigns to silence the outcries of the violations of international human rights and humanitarian law due to the Geneva Convention, which United States armed conflict in which people are fighting against colonial domination, alien occupation, and against racist regimes in the exercise of their own rights of self-determination are protected by the Geneva Convention, whether it be state-sponsored or state-supported terrorism. That's all.
Thank you, Clarissa. That was a lot, and we really appreciate you, breaking down some of the just the definition of Philippines and its state and economic and cultural state as being semi-feudal, semi-colonial, and what that really means, and how the that state, keeping people in that state of disenfranchisement also has led to the armed struggle. And I think again, at the end, we can talk a little bit more with questions, why the armed struggle of the Philippines also parallels with what's happening in Palestine as well. So, okay. Thank you, Clarissa. Thanks so much. And we're going to move on to Ken from Anakbayan. Ken, go ahead.
Okay, let me just get my notes all together. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Today, I want to talk about a little bit of, I guess, sharing perspectives about Christian Zionism, which is very common among a lot of Filipino, Christians who are more in the Protestant sect, and also here in America as well, with a very large majority of evangelical Christians existing in the country, as well as Christian Zionism existing within their theologies. So just a little bit of background, I guess, on my life and how this topic became something that I've become interested in. I grew up in the church, and the church that I was going to, especially back home in the Philippines, was very pro-Israel. And so growing up, that was the narrative. that like Israel is God's holy people, and that the church and that eventually one day God was going to, or I don't know, like end the world through like bringing together Israel as like the holy nation of God. And when I moved here and went to college and kind of like grew a political consciousness, especially regarding Palestine, it made me think a lot differently about my own like interpretation of the Bible, and just like I don't know, like all the theology that I was like brought up growing up. And now I find myself in a different place where I'm still involved in church, and but I've gone through my own like deconstruction, and I've been trying to channel my faith towards more towards causes of justice and compassion. And so just a brief primer on Christian Zionism. Um, Christian Zionism is a political and theological ideology that uses Christian texts to support just like this modern nation state of Israel being created out of the belief that Israel has a cosmic purpose to bring about the end times, like the second coming of Jesus. And this kind of theology is very popular within evangelical circles, both in the United States, in the West, and also in the Philippines. It also justifies the colonial and political violence against people of Palestine and other Arab peoples. So ultimately, like it's a theology of empire. As I mentioned earlier, it's rooted in this like apocalyptic framework about the end of human history. And this framework is widely known, is known by another term within like some Christian circles, like it's called dispensationalism. And it's actually a very recent formation within Christian theology. This was pushed forward in the 1800s, even before Jewish Zionism became a thing. So back in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's this one like theologian, his name is John Darby, and his writings became popular. It was basically encouraging like Christian leaders in Britain to kind of like see what was at the time known as Palestine, to see it as a place where, as a site of like the apocalypse. And like I said, this is a relatively like modern theology compared to like the more ancient practices of like Judaism and Christianity that have been centered around like caring for community and for justice and for compassion. It builds off of popular theology at the time, which views Europeans as Christian soldiers, taking up like this new mission to, I don't know, bring about the end times, basically. And this really matters because not only is it this like theological abstract idea that centers like the creation of the modern state of Israel, but it has very material, very like tangible ramifications in the world, as we see right now with, you know, the occupation of Palestine and the apartheid happening, and also just like the ongoing colonial and political destruction of Palestinians and, you know, other peoples around the world. So I just want to kind of share some like brief, I don't know, like debunking Christian Zionism and why it's actually antithetical to like the practice of like what people say is Christianity. Not only is Christian Zionism anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, it's also actually kind of anti-Semitic at the very core of it, because it doesn't actually care for the well-being of Jewish people. It's concerned with the fulfillment of its own agendas. It maintains that Christian supremacy is like the thing alongside white supremacy. It thinks of Israel only as a site of the apocalypse and nothing more. Moreover, it misreads like this fundamental text that a lot of like Christian Zionists push forward, that's found in Genesis 12, which states that like God will curse everyone that curses Israel and blesses everyone that blesses Israel, like the nation state of Israel. And they use that text and misread the whole context of the entire like Jewish faith. It ignores the ethical demands, for example, in the Old Testament, prophets who once condemned leaders of Israel for participating in violence against their own people. It also ignores passages in the Old Testament that speak of Israel as a vessel of goodness to bless other nations. So it's not they misread just a lot of passages to say that like they should fight for political power and vanity, when actually the call for, the nations by the prophets was actually to serve other people. It also like I said, Christian Zionism is mostly centered around this like idea that like Christians are supposed to be like the new Israel. And but what it actually also ignores is that it ignores a Christian command to love your neighbor as yourself. If you look at the New Testament, especially the books of the Gospels, you'll see that Jesus rejects the pursuit of political power in order to welcome the oppressed onto the dinner table of God, even at the expense of his own life. It also ignores a lot of New Testament teachings and letters that basically expands the faith to include all people. And I think one of the other things that I want to highlight is that it ignores the reality and the fact that Palestinian people today are actually descendants of the people who lived in that land at the time of Jesus. It's always been called Palestine. Christian Zionism falsely conflates biblical Hebrews, who were an oppressed and a marginalized people, with modern Israel and the nation state of it. Biblical Hebrews have more shared ancestry with surrounding nations. They're more likely to share ancestry with Arabs than with Europeans. It also ignores the reality that there are Palestinian Christians and Arab Christians that existed within the nation of Palestine and in surrounding nations, and ultimately also ignores the historical conditions that led to the expulsion of Palestinians from their land by the West in order to insert the Jewish diaspora onto a land that is not theirs, not for the Jewish diaspora's sake, but to expand their political and their religious ideas. And so ultimately, Christian Zionism runs in step with white supremacy and American exceptionalism as well. And it ignores this whole, the political and economic suffering of the global South and oppressed peoples of the world, which the West has been responsible for decades and decades and generations now. And for me, like the practice of true Christianity is like standing with the marginalized and oppressed people, and to recognize that, to recognize the dignity of all people. And true Christianity actually critiques empire and colonial and imperial religions and supremacist beliefs. And it also recognizes that the teachings of the prophets and of Jesus are antithetical to greed, to vanity, to pride, to desire for political power, and to the oppression of others. And it also recognizes that Jewish people, as well as those who adhere to Islam, have the right to practice their own faith traditions, and that they are our neighbors whom we have to live, whom we ought to live alongside with in peace and in justice. And so that's the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I guess you can ask them later, but thank you for letting me just share about that briefly.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was a really extremely precise and very fast wrap up of Christian Zionism and how dangerous it is to not just Christianity in general and all religious faiths in general, but just specifically to what's happening in Palestine. So thank you so much for breaking that down for us. I think next up, we are going to have Misty, also from Anakbayan. Misty, are you ready?
Yes, I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Cool. Everyone see?
It's coming through. It's coming through.
Can y'all see that now? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we're good.
So yeah, mahalo to all the speakers who spoke before me, and especially to Kent, who shared about Christian Zionism. I learned a lot just in like that 10 minutes that you spoke. So thank you to everyone who is also here today. So my role here today will be to bring it back to what is currently happening in Hawaii. For folks who are here, we may be familiar with the Rim of the Pacific exercises, or as it's more commonly called RIMPAC, which is currently here on the islands, engaging in basically war activities, and that we'll talk about later. But we see here now that 29 different nations, 40 surface ships, 3 submarines, 14 national land forces, and over 150 aircraft and 25,000 personnel, which is a ton of people who are coming to the islands or who are on the islands, in order to engage in these war exercises. And their theme for this year is partners, integrated and prepared, and which we'll see later, as well as kind of like a ridiculous thing to say, but also very in line with, the way that they prop themselves up and the way that they, are also engaging in their own propaganda, but yeah, moving forward, and we see that, even in their military organization, they have people from the different countries engaged in their impact, as part of the like command staff that they hold. And so these are just some of the, well, actually, no, all of the 29 nations that are participating in RIMPAC this year. It does vary from other years, but for the most part, countries like Australia and Canada have always been there. Countries like Japan, France, Germany, and all these different, and you can see a lot of these countries here who are also part of NATO have really no business being in the Asia Pacific. First and foremost, one of them there is Israel, which really has no business, or the IDF or the IOF really has no business being in Hawaii, and are really here as part of RIMPAC to engage these other militaries, these other navies, and how best to basically kill the people, kill their environment, and to further exploit the resources that these other countries have. And if you can notice here as well, another participant of RIMPAC is the Philippines. And so this year, one of the new things that has changed is that the Philippines did not bring boats to RIMPAC this year, did not bring ships like many of these other nations did. And the reason for that was because of the current tensions that are ongoing in the West Philippine Sea. And looking back at history, we can actually see that the reason that the Philippines even joined RIMPAC, what had set it off, was because of the growing collisions with China, within the West Philippine Sea, within the South China Sea. And so that was what pushed the Philippines to join RIMPAC in the first place, and that has continued until today. And so these are just some of the activities that happened during RIMPAC. This first one here is, I believe, at the Pohakaloa training area, where there has been extensive bombing, causing, or even with the amphibious assaults and the sinking of ships, where as leaked depleted uranium, has leaked PFAs, all these harmful chemicals into the land and into the ocean. Members of the military or the military in general have like this like free will to, or like free pass to kill like millions of birds just for these trainings. They're given permission, like as long as you don't go past this amount of birds that you kill, you're fine. And so you can see here in the bottom left corner is one of their amphibious assault machines, which they practice on Bellows Beach, where is a pretty sacred like Honu resting place, or nesting ground. And because of these amphibious assaults, their natural habitat is destroyed and disturbed, and it makes it very hard for the Hemorrhoid turtles to be able to nest there properly. And so for a long time, they have not been able to, until like 2020, when they didn't hold RIMPAC because of COVID, or they didn't hold like all their regular activities such as the amphibious assaults, that the turtles were actually able to nest that year. And so we can see just like the result, or the impact that RIMPAC has on not just the land and the environment, but even the people. Nowadays, I don't have the photo in the slide deck here, but nowadays we see all of these different clubs and all of these different like bars post like their military discounts and like welcome RIMPAC 2024, which is absolutely disgusting, because in reality they're advertising the sexual exploitation of local and native local and native women, to serve as these basically these like toys for military men, which is absolutely a disgusting thing to see happen every time that RIMPAC comes around. And even across the world, Clarissa mentioned earlier, the case of Jennifer Laude, where Joseph Scott Pemberton was basically he had like the special holding jail. Even when he was in jail, he had like the special holding jail where he basically had the same freedoms as someone who was free. He was just in the Philippines. And when he was pardoned by Duterte, he was brought back to Hawaii to the Indo-Pacific Command, which has long been headquartered here as part of the military's longstanding like military occupation of the Hawaiian Islands and their illegal occupation, the US's illegal occupation of Hawaii. And so we see that continuing through these military games and where they basically bring war to the doorsteps of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so this last picture here was just an example of like their kind of simulations that they do. We heard recently that they have also been like conducting like these kind of simulations where it's basically an attack on indigenous people. And so they act out that situation of like people fighting back against their oppressors. So yeah. And all of this goes with this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific that the US Indo-PACOM or the US Indo-Pacific Command likes to bring to wherever they go. It's like their hashtag on every tweet that they tweet. But this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific, like what does it really mean? Like who is it free and open for? I know other speakers had mentioned earlier talking about how like for example in the Philippines, the agriculture in the Philippines is very backwards. And like even the Mining Act in 1995, these are all conditions that are brought on by the US's intervention in the Philippines and their want to stop countries like the Philippines from progressing because that would mean that they lose a place for them to gather cheap materials or they lose a place for them to dump all of their products on. And they do that in many countries across the world, not just within the Indo-Pacific. And that is a part of their, their imperialist interest and why the ongoing tension with China, the US has really been pushing for things to happen. They've really been engaging in a way that they want to start a war because for them war is also profit and it allows them to keep their hold in the Philippines and to keep their hold in countries that even like Palestine, where the US has long supported Israel in their genocidal tactics, in their way to suppress the Palestinian people, because for them that is their business interest. They're able to control that area of the world. They're able to get all of the oil reserves. They're able to, bring in all of their products, bring in all of their extra interest within that region. And so that's part of US imperialism and its goal at the end of the day is to maintain its control throughout the world and to maintain its power and money. And so in the Philippines, RIMPAC being a military exercise, the way that it looks in the Philippines is the Balikatan exercises, which are an annual exercise. Of course, it's not at the scale that RIMPAC is with over 25,000 people, but they do bring in a lot of Marine troops. One in particular that they bring in is the 25th Infantry Division, which is based in Schofield in Wahiwa, to train the Philippine military to basically, the best ways to suppress the Filipino people who are fighting for the rights, in particular the farmers and the workers who have been standing up. And like also as Claire said, mentioned earlier, the right to resistance that these people have because they have so long been under the control of US imperialism. And so these different Marine divisions, the 25th Infantry Battalion, go to the Philippines every year around April and May for the Balikatan exercises. This year, they really centered it around the Batanes islands, one of the largest one being Basco, where they set up another forward fueling and rearming point. So it's another place for them to store fuel, like we saw in Red Hill, where all this fuel and jet fuel leaked into the aquifer. They brought actually 39 million gallons of that fuel from Red Hill back to the Philippines to also serve as a fueling area within the Philippines. And so they also did these different exercises. There were a bunch of folks from Bayan, the Bagong Alyansang Makabayan USA, who had actually gone to the Philippines just recently for a peace mission earlier this year. And in doing so, they were able to talk with a bunch of the farmers and fishermen and workers who are in the area where they conducted the Baligatan exercises. And one thing that they saw was they paid this one fisherman $400 for his boat for them to practice how they can land from a plane onto the boat in the most effective ways. But at the end of the day, like, why would they do that? You know, like, what was the reason? And, you know, it really is a sign that at the end of the day, when they launch their wars of aggression, when they launch their proxy wars, the US will bring the Filipino people into, they are going to be caught in the crossfire. It's the Filipino farmers, Filipino fishermen, and, you know, Filipino workers who are going to be caught in this war that they're trying to launch against China. And at the end of the day, they will be the most affected by it, and the US will go on its merry way with more money and more power than it should have. And so one of the things they've been doing too is establishing more EDCA sites. So EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, was the result of the US's failed lease renewal in 1991, which is super important considering that, you know, lease renewals are currently happening in Hawaii, and submit testimony, just to plug, against the lease renewals, against the draft environmental impact statements. And so when they couldn't renew the leases in 1991, the US military said, oh yeah, we're gonna have these like places in the Philippines, but they're not our bases. They're just like places where we store all of our weapons, store all of our fuel, store all of our stuff, but they're not ours. They're the Philippines. But at the end of the day, you know, who controls the Philippine military except for the United States? And so, and as was mentioned earlier, the Visiting Forces Agreement was a predecessor to the EDCA. And it was signed in 1998 and basically allows the American military forces to come into the Philippines as they please and to also act with impunity, as we saw with Joseph Scott Pemberton, who basically, you know, committed murder but was still allowed free, you know, and who was still like living the life back in the Philippines, even if he was supposed to be in jail. And so we can see that the US has many ways of controlling and holding control in the places where it goes. And one of the main ways that they do that too is through funding the military, funding its puppet regimes in these areas. This is an example of one of the ways that they're doing that today. The Philippines Enhanced Resilience Act, or the PERA Act, which is a bill that's set to send $2.5 billion to the Philippines for modernization of defense capabilities, basically to give them a bunch more weapons. And so, like, what does this mean in terms of like how we connect our struggles with Palestine? So the Philippines actually likes to pride itself, or the Philippine government likes to pride itself on having such an amazing relationship with Israel and having such an amazing like partnership with them. And you know, they like to say, oh yeah, we were like the only country in Southeast Asia who voted for Israel to become a country in 1947, which is gross. But also the US sends billions upon billions of dollars to Israel to fund their like arms industry, and the Philippines is one of Israel's biggest buyers. And so it really goes to show just how connected also the war industry is between the Philippines and Israel and the US. And at the end of it all is the US giving money to these countries who pride themselves on killing farmers and killing workers and destroying the land. And so it really is imperative that all of us here, and so glad to see like all the folks here and representatives of these different organizations standing together against the Zionist entity of Israel, against the Philippine government, and against the United States, because if these are the principles and values that they are putting forward, if these are the things that they are doing, you know, they do not deserve any support at all. You know, they are only pushing, you know, this idea that they are what is free and open Indo-Pacific. They are the embodiment of freedom, but in reality, they are the embodiment of a terrible, terrible like empire that needs to be brought down. And so when we think of our right to resistance as well, and how that looks like in our areas, you know, even engaging in conversations like this, engaging in protests, engaging in different actions across the world until like the highest form of activism of armed struggle, it's really something that is part of our responsibility in order to actually achieve genuine liberation and national democracy. And so, inviting everyone here to, if this is the first time that maybe you've heard of other organizations like us, or the different organizations like GVP and SAKA, if you're in the Philippines, to join these organizations and fight for a better world, and to, join organizations even like Anakbayan and HiCHRP and grassroots organizations like these Filipino organizations to, see what national democracy and how liberation can really be achieved. So that is my piece. Thank you all for listening. Yeah. Also to support things like the Philippine Human Rights Act. Sorry, I forgot about this last slide. But thank you all.
Thank you, Misty. Thank you for giving us a comprehensive look at what RIMPAC has been doing here in Hawaii and how Philippines is related to that. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I'm amazed that we're cramming so much in here. I was going to speak a little bit from my personal perspective as a Filipino who also grew up Jewish, as someone who's also been organizing with JVP Hawaii. So I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to just reiterate a couple of points that might make folks who are in the room. I have a feeling that most of us here are already doing work for Palestine, but I do just want to reiterate and a couple of ideas, mainly that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And I think this is one of the easiest traps to fall into because anti-Semitism has been so weaponized in what we've been seeing, just not even just since October 7th, but just historically in any critique of Israel. The question of anti-Semitism is very quickly weaponized to say, well, you cannot critique Israel because it's the state of the Jewish people and because of the things that have happened to the Jewish people in the past, specifically the European genocide, the Holocaust, the European Holocaust, and the 6 million Jews and other people who were killed in that Holocaust. Because of that situation and the establishment of the state of Israel, it's impossible to critique Israel without being called anti-Semitic. And I'm just here to tell you as a Jewish person and also a Filipino, that's just a load of crap. And any nation state needs to be held to high standards and be critiqued. And the Jewish state does not represent all Jewish people. And there are many Jewish people, very, very diverse groups of Jewish people all over the world, many of whom do not support Israel and what it's doing, and do not even, some of them, like myself, believe that Israel as a state, as a nation state, as an entity in and of itself, a political entity, should not exist at all. And there are many, many people in the Jewish community who would push back against that statement. But as an anti-Zionist and someone who grew up in Zionism, I'm just here to tell you that that is an okay statement to make, and it does not make you anti-Semitic to say that. So I know that people struggle with that. I just want to say that out loud first. I grew up in Chicago. My dad's family is from Germany. They're German Jews, and they were, well, my dad's father was a young Zionist, so he grew up in Zionist culture in Breslau, which was a large Jewish community in Eastern Germany, which is now a part of Poland. So that city doesn't exist anymore. It was consumed, or not consumed, but subsumed into Poland. And it's now called Wrocław. And that was a very kind of old, famous Jewish community that also. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Close.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I'll be almost finished. Thank you so much. They're kicking me out of the space that I'm in at UH, sorry. But I'm at Campus Center. I didn't know that it closed, but I guess it does. Just like briefly, my family history, my grandfather was a young Zionist in 1935. He went to Palestine as a settler. The youth community organizing inside of Germany and Europe at the time was also in collaboration with people who didn't want Jews in Europe anymore. So the elitist Jewish community, and also in collaboration with British elite community, was also strategizing to create a system to, basically encourage Jewish people to leave Europe through settling Palestine. And there were a lot of youth groups that were organized to encourage Jewish people and young people to make that trip based on that, what Ken was speaking of before, this sort of like inherent right as the chosen people having this sort of inherent biblical right to the land. And so my grandfather was part of that. And so in 1935, he took a ship to Palestine, and he began working as a laborer there, and then was also part of the Haganah, which was the early Jewish militias that enacted the Nakba. And so my father was born in Palestine. He was born in quote unquote Israel in 1950, 2 years after the establishment of the state. And my great grandparents died in Auschwitz, and they were, of course, died in the concentration camps. And my grandfather and my grandmother met in Palestine, married, and had my dad and his two sisters there. And then they migrated to Chicago in 1955. So growing up in Chicago, I grew up in a Jewish community in Zionism, and it's taken me, 20 plus years to kind of extract myself from the ideology of Zionism, which, like Ken was mentioning, has a direct connection to Christian Zionism. And actually Christian Zionism predates Jewish Zionism. So it's basically, the way I think of it, is like a big giant co-optation of our suffering and pain and yearning for a homeland that the Jews have suffered continuously in diaspora as they've been kind of displaced and suffered prejudice against them in many different communities all over the world, including India and China and Latin America and Africa and such. So my mom's family's Filipino, and that's why I'm interested in this issue. And I do believe that I want to give us some time for questions and just kind of more discussion. But I did just want to really emphasize the point that there are so many kinds of Jews all over the world, and that it is absolutely necessary that not only Jewish people, but Christians and Filipinos and everybody show solidarity with Palestine in this particular moment, because of what's happening and the horrors, and really the, like, what we're considering a loss of the human soul that is happening, like on the part of the Israeli people and Jewish people who live in Israel, and the actions that they're committing. We don't have any. They're totally cutting me off here. I'm just going to go mute and walk outside, but I'm going to let y'all continue the discussion. So thank you everyone for listening to that. And maybe someone can just continue while I switch locations. Hi, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. So sorry. I hope it works out soon. But we would like to open the floor for some questions from folks. If you feel more comfortable putting in the chat, that's totally fine. Or if you want to unmute, please feel free to do that. Yeah, we'll open the floor. Thank you all. And in the meantime, while y'all are thinking of your questions, should you have any, we'd like to also be able to take action together. So I'm going to share a donation link in the chat for folks to donate to it. This is in support of a family in Gaza. Rebecca has the other details, so I will wait for them to get back before I share anything else. But there are folks here who are helping to support a family in Gaza. So the donations that we gather from this webinar will be put towards that to send to folks over there. Kim, I think I see your hand raised. Okay, go.
Thanks so much for putting this together, you guys. Really beautiful job with the panel. Every single one of you just so articulate, so passionate. I loved whatever all of you are saying. I had one comment and then one question. I just wanted to offer that I just recently learned that part of the horror of the Pacific nations voting either to abstain or actually against the ceasefire resolution. I've kind of assumed that was to do with Christian Zionism, and this weird link, yeah, whatever, everything that Ken was saying. But I recently found out also that Israel sponsors water desalination projects in the Pacific, and that they have like courted Pacific nations for a long time. And I just yeah, it's just another piece of the puzzle that I don't think is getting talked about enough, like with the climate disaster. There's just Pacific nations, I think they're having their arms twisted to to accept this kind of international help. But I think that like maybe part of our Kuleana in for BDS in the Pacific is to think more carefully about that, and like how we can help Pacific nations to have water projects that are funded by others, but they can get that kind of support without having to support genocide. And then Judith, I'm probably going to answer my own question, but I'm just curious, like, there's been so many attacks in academia in the US, and like professors who, are, and students who are, being punished or have their jobs revoked or whatever because of their support for Palestine. And I didn't know, is that happening also within the Philippines too? I assume that it is, but I haven't really seen like calls to action on that. I'm just curious about, yeah, Philippine freedom of speech around Palestine.
They've been very violent whenever we will be doing demonstrations. I think I mentioned earlier about the arrests, and so even myself, who have joined demonstrations to Israel, they're very strict when it comes to going to the U.S. embassy, and as well as the Israeli embassy. So they would have really, really strict, and a lot of people who are sharing the solidarity and feelings about what's happening in Palestine, who are not really either not organized or not informed about how the military or the armed forces here in the Philippines and the police are actually very they side a lot with how they're surprised to know basically that the police are siding with these embassies instead of like protecting the people who are demonstrating. So there we are able to start conversations about all this, and how the US is technically behind everything that's happening with all the EDCA and the exercises here. But in university level, there are a lot also of not as big as what's happening in the world, wherein they force out students out of their classrooms and everything. I think we, as more of a united front, we go for demonstrations and mobs in the streets.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm back for just a second to answer the question about the donations. I'm going to put something into the chat.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Supporting is in Gaza, and they have been providing water jugs, and I think also various families in, I think, 4 different locations. And I think so far we've been able to send about $7,000 to this specific family in Gaza. And so I'm going to post a little bit more right now in the chat, the details of that. And I think Ken was able to post the donor box link to Laing's donor box. And we're going to be just collecting the donations from today and then passing them on to Imani from JVP, who's in charge of sending those donations. So if anyone, if it's possible for folks to make any donation, even $5 would be awesome. You can put that into the donor box and we'll be sending that along. So thanks for plugging that for us, Misty.
Any other questions from folks? Judith, I have one more question for you. Sorry, I know it's a lot of questions to you, but I was wondering if you could kind of talk about the Little Gaza Kitchen in the Philippines and how folks are organizing around that, or like what the, yeah, I guess just more information about it too.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to talk about what SAKA works on in solidarity with Palestine. So we've been hosting events, and we have actually produced a Artists for Just Peace zine so that we can also encourage artists to join in solidarity, submit their works, and we have printed them and published them online. Aside from this, we're launching next month a Artists for Just Peace launch EP series of where we have called on musicians and individuals to submit their music. Again, fundraising for Palestine solidarity. So for the when we launched this, we actually partnered with Little Gaza Kitchen, and all the families were currently in Manila, and most of the funds are actually sent to them as well. And we also conduct community kitchens wherein we actually were able to create to cook musalwa with all of the advocates and encourage more solidarity from the vegan community and also the people who are advocates for food security. When it comes to Little Gaza, actually, I think they also partner with a lot of organizations who currently want to do more community kitchen with them. Recently, I think there are little events where they would be. I just saw this on their social media account or like friends who attended. I think there was some sort of a celebration. Someone is pregnant. I think. Sorry, that is a very very. But this is. I feel like this is a positive thing and it's good because there are more people gathering in support, going to them, listening to their stories, and joining them in meals and activities. So yeah, there are a lot of support coming from individuals and organizations in the Philippines, and it is very obvious when it comes to when it comes to mobilizations and a lot of fundraisers that people really show up. Although, of course, this is one of the ways that we help and provide solidarity and from the Philippines. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks, Judith. I wanted to add one last thing that we had kind of talked about this and we didn't really have anyone to focus on it specifically, but when I was in Tel Aviv in 2013, I think, there was a particular part of the town where the Filipino caregivers would gather on Sundays. Just how they do in Hong Kong and other places where there are larger Filipino communities that are coming together to have their Sundays off and just have food and hang out together. Maybe their kids are there too. And I do think that it's worth mentioning because, we're talking about labor, we're talking about farmers, we're talking about the fishermen, we're talking about all the different ways that workers are also involved in the Philippines, but then also how they're affected by the occupation, American occupation, and the domestic labor situation, domestic workers as caregivers. There are quite a few Filipinos, also Thai and Vietnamese and different Southeast Asian communities that live and work in the state of Israel. And in fact, I believe one, if not two, of the hostages that were taken on October 7th were Filipino. And so that's another really direct connection that I think a lot of people don't realize between the Philippines and Palestine and Israel. And I don't really have any particular like specific comments about it. I think there's a lot of details, but I think it does kind of point back again to the way that Philippines is maintained in the semi-feudal state and requires our workers to go abroad to get work, to become domestic laborers, and that the extraction of the labor, especially of women's labor, is then drawn into places like Israel, which does have a large elderly population and requires a lot of care, domestic care. So I wanted to pull that in there because that is, again, another kind of puzzle piece to the whole situation. But I thanks Manang Kim for bringing up the question of desalination of the water. And one other thing I wanted to mention is also the geothermal plant on the Big Island, the Ormat Technologies, is also an Israeli technology company, the one that was sort of like in the line of the lava potentially going to be destroyed. Geothermal plant is also could be another potential site of a campaign in the same way. Like, how can we get our Pacific communities, the Philippines, Hawai'i, the rest of the Pacific, to divest from Israel? And a lot of it is through technological research and the strategic partnership, which is something that, shut down Puna Geothermal and Israel out of Hawai'i. Those are definitely campaign points that could be important places for all of us to kind of organize around in the next, coming years and now. So I don't know if anyone else has any questions. We're kind of like right at time, but we have 2 more minutes if anyone else wants to share. Rick has put in the chat, what about the governor's memorandum of understanding with Israel and cybersecurity and AI? That is another issue that kind of falls under the strategic partnership. If folks are interested in looking into that, there's issues with cybersecurity, there's agriculture, there's AI, there's of course geothermal. We also have some other kind of biotech in general. So Syngenta, Monsanto, the kind of biotech stuff that's happening. I do believe there's some also Israeli research that's related, and also a lot of marine underwater marine research that has Israeli sponsorship or co-sponsorship that goes through UH. So those are other points. I'm personally not that familiar with that MOU, Rick, but I think moving forward, I think we are going to be doing a lot more research on how Israel is specifically tied to Hawai'i and how we can run better campaigns to, just basically boycott and divest from those scenarios, which is also part of the U.S. divest campaign that SFJPUH is working on. How can we get UH to divest from weapons and other Israeli connected funding sources through the endowment at UH, which I think has over $1 million in investments in Israel. So yeah, there's a lot of entanglements, I guess, to put it lightly. But yeah, thank you, Manang Kim, for your thanks. And solidarity event on August 5th. Cool. Please send it if any folks want to plug other events or anything. We can also send it up in a follow-up email. So please reach out to us. I just want to, shout out to Anakbayan, to Misty, and to Ken, and to HiCHRP folks, to Clarissa and Rick was also organizing with us, and then to Judith for calling in from the Philippines in the morning. with SAKA. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm really grateful. Sorry for the weird technological interruption there, having to switch locations, but really grateful to everyone for being here, and free Palestine. Mahalo. Salamat.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.